It used to be, if you wanted to be a painter, you actually had to go out and paint something. Nowadays, with machine-generated art, any goober can, quote-unquote, create images. Machine art has challenged the quantitative environment of the artistic system. But what is a quantitative environment? Quantitative environment refers to anything that can be measured. Everyone seems to understand the numerical differences between sex and an orgy. One has way too many of one thing, and the other, not so much. Both sex and orgies have elements about their nature that can be easily measured. What's important isn't so much the differences themselves, but the fact that these concepts surround the concept of measurability. Numerical values can almost always be seen by observing how much of something is around. So, if you're in bed with one femboy, it's just a normal Tuesday, but if you're in bed with 50 of them, suddenly it becomes an orgy. There's a repetition of something that changes the system. When does sex stop being sex and becomes an orgy? The key differences between sex and an orgy are the amount of individuals involved, things that are easily measured. And sometimes, having too much of something can mean what's had is simply a measurable function. The difference in measurable value between sex and an orgy is part reason why one seems to embody something that is beautiful, chaotic, and disgusting all at the same time, while the other is seen as normal. It's only because of all these measurable qualities that orgies exist in the first place. If these key qualities were never reached, it wouldn't be an orgy. It would be something else. Maybe it would be sex. On one hand, it's now possible for anyone to bring images to life. On the other, whacking everything off is something that is growing harder: machine art. Machine art has quickly expanded within the artistic landscape. Art is suddenly readily available to those who are not artists. An influx of machine art has suddenly entered like a bug in a system. Maybe art has captured some sort of disease. How much damage is acceptable? These are just the vague, big questions, and smaller questions aren't any easier. Do we accept machine art to be art? Measurable differences between sex and orgies are certainly not the same nor only forces responsible for that of machine art and human art. It's like the difference between graphite and diamond. They're both composed of the same atoms, but why are they different? How did these evolve to cause these atomically similar things to be linked together? Why is there just enough to recognize that these two are both similar and different simultaneously? And not just strictly from a scientific sense, but abstractly. How do these things exist side by side conceptually, such that the mere words graphite and diamond invoke a sort of neural resonance of that of an analogy? Clearly, some sort of spooky action at a distance is occurring such that graphite and diamond are related in ways that transcend the physical. There's so much quantifiability between these two that they seem almost entangled. They seem almost synonymous. Maybe machine art is better compared to masturbation. Masturbation is individual and sex is communal. There it is again. Countable quantities. Obvious differences between two similar things. Is it far-fetched to claim that masturbation and sex have an element of difference and similarity between the two? Both masturbation and sex seem to exist in a similar genre, but are distinctly different. Both embody some abstract physical zenith, the orgasm, with plain numerical differences, individual versus multiple. All the characteristics that separate sex from an orgy or masturbation from sex can be related back to something that we can count, something we can measure, some quantifiable element. These qualities that can be related back towards something countable and measurable are like broad strokes between a million and billionaire. Okay. So we've established that there's some sort of vague link between sex and masturbation and machine art and the fact that they're all related to quantifiability. There seems to be some sort of spectrum in which the art can exist. No longer does some particular gate seem to keep out certain inputs. Something has broken such that machine art has flooded the environment. What machine art is doing, undeniably, is spreading itself within the artistic landscape, infecting and nesting itself within art. There is a measurable shift between two classes, machine art into art. Human art is now fighting a quantitative battle against machine art, and there is an increasing amount of machine art that dilutes the human art ratio. There is, in essence, a fight for existence. AI art pushes for itself, and art seeks to maintain its shape. These are simply observations, things I consider facts and statements, things that we can overtly agree upon or disagree. The point of these statements is to invoke discourse, and from here, I will share my speculations. Perhaps machine art can be considered art because it is similar to the connections between sex and masturbation, despite their differences, existing in some sort of overlapping phase space. Or maybe machine art can't be considered art because it lacks some sort of precedent. In all cases, it doesn't really matter. We just know that human and machine art will be definitively similar and undeniably different. Whatever the answer is related to some sort of measurable expression. Similarities and differences don't just float somewhere in a vacuum. It is there. It is here. It, like all things, seeks to spread its existence and make more of itself. The numbers just keep growing. It's like a parasite or a worm, something it just elongates out of nowhere. It's not a bug, it's a feature. So, if machine art continues to multiply, how will art change? Will machine art itself change? How can it get worse? Better? What do we do about it? Now, for me, all these questions and no answers feel a lot like all work and no play. This is where I feel compelled to make radical claims in order to equalize the imbalance. Things need to evolve in order to cope with quantifying changes. It's like getting sick once you've caught a cold. It's not exactly clear why or how or when it happens, we just know that it does. We just accept that when you've gotten a cold, you're also sick. There is no separation between the two. They are inexplicably related. The core tension of machine art seems to be its ability to change the landscape of art simply because it spreads itself quantifiably. The number of machine art grows naturally and rapidly. The defining quality of machine art then becomes that the number of it grows. Because everybody and their daddy wants to become an AI artist, it naturally has an upward trajectory. Some sort of stain has made itself visible on a previously spotless system. It is somewhere near here where the question of conscious eradication begins to arise. What do we do about this new stain? Do we seek to cleanse it, which is just an anthropocentric description of limiting quantities? Or do we allow it to live, which is the counterpart of increasing quantities? There's a way for both human and machine art to coexist, but it is not without the compromise that involves an eradication of the previous landscape. To accept machine art is to accept a quantitative change in environment. It is not so much about the change of art itself as it is the fact that machine art uses quantitative qualities to induce change. These quantitative qualities infect the previous system and almost forces it to transition to a new state, like carbon choosing to be graphite or diamond, or sex turning to and fro an orgy. Systems seek to control this changing nature by accepting quantitative qualities to be qualitative qualities and becoming entirely new things. Perhaps the exchange between Hemingway and Fitzgerald better sums this point. The rich are different from us. Yes, they have more money. If we choose to accept machine art into our system, we are not simply accepting machine art. We accept the consequence of change. These increases in net complications, emergent properties that are predictably unpredictable, are like quantum physicists accepting that everything is a wave function. Everything is just pure chance. Machine art points to the idea that quantitative fluctuations are the real essence of things. That the difference between a diamond and graphite are nothing more than mere illusion. that the difference between machine art and human art are so closely packed together that we realize that they are not different, but one and the same. That what art and orgies and sex and masturbation and all the associated analogies are simply quantifiability systems. A guide, a how-to to exist. Maybe it's not, I think, therefore I am. Maybe it's because I think, therefore I am. And maybe not just I, but because I, them, and because them, they. All these adjacent existences interplay with such intimacy that it's difficult to believe that they're really different. They all just seem to wear different masks. And so much like love seems to be an underlying process of humanity, does this imply love has some contingent existential requirement? To try to exact a point at which something does or doesn't exist is an uncomfortable question, because at some point following this trail will lead us somewhere completely unknown. The further we travel along in pursuit of this, the farther along we end up nowhere, like a bug waddling along a Mobius strip. Surely there must be some metaphysical ties between machine art and the self. So the question about acceptability of machine art becomes less about itself and more about everything else. Machine art allows us insight as to how things that previously did not exist seem to come into existence. Because no machine art. Machine art only gained perspective relevancy through bursting into existence. However, it seems to have sprung up from a bunch of unrelated mechanisms. When boiled down, machined art actually seems to come from nothing. It doesn't actually come from machines. So there is no rejection of machine art. To reject machine art is to reject existence itself. Machine art and human art are not simply interactors of each other, but analogies of the strangeness of being. These things seem to predicate their existence on something, but there's an oscillation in which they share and differ on those predications. It is possible that existences, such as machine art, are actually fluctuations of quantification, that the behavior of machine art is synthesized the same way as cancer or genocide, that this is how systems behave when there's an element of quantity. Questions of being arise, the true binary.
To be or not to be, annihilate them!